Welcome everybody to the Dharmaloka Buddhist Centre. We're here in the afternoon on the 13th of August. And what I'm going to do this afternoon is just give a little talk to support our care group listening line. This listening line now has been open for well over a month and is starting to get fairly well known, and many people are starting to call in and talk to the listeners that the Buddhist Society here have trained to be able to take your calls and discuss with you really anything that you would like to talk about. And this afternoon I'm just going to introduce this line again, but with perhaps a little bit of a more delicate subject, because I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about suicidal ideation. Now, just before I start into that and dive right into it, I would just like to make people aware that if you are feeling suicidal, or if you if the talk really in any way exacerbates some feelings you might have, please do call your local emergency line. The care group line will be certainly very pleased to talk to you, but we would really, we're really only set up to just talk and discuss these things. So if you're in a crisis of any way, in any way, it would be very good for you just to call your own emergency line in whichever state or country that you're in. But I wanted to just raise this subject today because it is very pertinent for those for people who do listen on telephone lines, and I've had a lot of experience with this over the years, having worked for the Samaritans for some 22 years. But I wanted to just talk about the prevalence of the way that we do from time to time have suicidal thoughts in our mind, and just to reassure too, for a start, that this is a fairly normal occurrence. Most of us will at one time or another have thoughts of wanting to end it all in our lives, and this is a very, very natural process. I think that's sort of caught up in the way that we think and the way that we're conditioned. And indeed, I wanted to sort of just jump straight in and talk about the Buddha's Four Noble Truths, because the Buddha's first noble truth, that of dukkha, or suffering or unsatisfactoriness, that the world is set up to be this way, will clearly show us that things aren't always necessarily going to be rosy in our worlds, in our individual universes that we each look out on and are involved with, and to some extent, or to a full extent, create. When we think of it in this way, we think about the first noble truth, the noble truth of dukkha, being the very first thing that the Buddha ever talked about in his teachings. You can see that the trouble in our lives can be expected, because we need to see that we do live in a world that is conditioned with duality, conditioned with extremes. And really all of conscious conditioning is really all about living with this world of duality. And in fact, in terms of conditioning, this is so really right through from anything physical. The physical universe itself is conditioned this way, as any physicist will tell you. All the particles and all of the molecules and entities that make up the world and our universe are all conditioned from matter and indeed antimatter. All of even the elementary particles that make up the universe, they all have a dualistic partner, like an electron that goes around an atom has a positron. A proton has an antiproton, even a neutron has an antineutron. And it runs through right right through the universe, right through from everything that comes into existence, there is always an opposite that is there. And this is so even with our thinking as well, with the way that our minds construct things and work. You know, I can maybe feel the surface here, and I know that when I'm feeling this surface, that's smooth. But I can only really discriminate that as smooth because I can juxtapose it against what it is to be rough. So right throughout our language and through all the way that we think, there is always these extremes of dualities that are there that go in to make up our language, to make up the way that we perceive things, the way we feel things. It's all right there in this conditioned world of duality, the dual nature of thinking and the dual nature of the physical setup of the universe. So, you know, light and day, rough and smooth, dark and light. It doesn't really matter where you go to, there is always this duality. And the Buddha talked about this world as, or reading the three poisons, in fact, he talked about, were greed, hatred, and delusion. And you can also see this as desire, aversion, or fear. He was saying that they're the three poisons. Now, these three poisons, of course, do have opposites as well. And indeed, the opposites of all things that sort of come together to make up this dual existence we live in are always going to be there. And you'll find, especially as and I know that I'm in speaking in this way to you, I know that I'm speaking here mainly to a group of people that are quite familiar with meditation and probably quite familiar with actually seeing these states of conditions in your own mind, just the way that things, how we can grasp onto extremes. But we can know that whenever we do grasp onto these extremes, there will always be the opposite there trailing up behind to somehow present itself if needs be. And what I wanted to point to today is really just how in our minds we can construct ideal worlds. And in fact, you know, for most of us, we're always dreaming of beautiful conditions, dreaming of what we want, dreaming of the way that we would like things to be. These dreams are there for us all, and we somehow try to make in our dreams the worlds that we totally desire. But the trouble is with dreams, and when these dreams are actually brought out into the world, and when we try to sort of make them right in the world, there is always this idea of the opposites that might arise for us. We're going to strike the opposite. They're not really, the world is not as controllable as what a dream state might be, I can remember once when I was practicing many years ago, I learned how to do lucid dreaming. It was quite an interesting thing to be able to sort of see when you're dreaming, to have this little device that I'd put over my eyes, and when the device flashed when I was dreaming, it kind of alerted me, and eventually I became conditioned enough to know that I was dreaming. And then from there you can start to make your dreams, you can start to drive your dreams in the direction that you would like to do, or the way that you would like them to be. I did end up sort of stopping that because I didn't think that it was necessarily a very good thing to continue on with, because there was always, I think the karma that you can make in a situation like that was very, very severe and strong. And I wanted to sort of come back to a more natural way of just being able to see the world in my dreams, but also in the way that I interact with the outside universe. And but I did notice with that little exercise in lucid dreaming, just how the dream state is very, very different than that of when you're living normally in the world, because there's always troubles that arise in the world for you. You might have an idealistic scenario that you're going to create, and sometimes they come off, sometimes it pays off, but very often it won't. Very often the opposite side in the nature of things will present itself to cause you trouble. And this is what the Buddha used to talk about when he was teaching all those years ago. Even back then, he would sort of talk about the disappointment that can come and the disappointment that can come when our dreams don't get fully realised. So just as I'm pointing to there, you'll see that there's this duality. The duality causes this dukkha to arise, this unsatisfactoriness. It's always there, and I think it was an absolutely marvellous thing that the Buddha did in citing this as his very, very first thing that he uttered, the very first noble truth, just to be able to see that this dukkha is such an important part of what we need to understand. And I think that in many ways it takes a very, very deep level of practice to really fully appreciate and understand dukkha and to understand the way that it works. Because the first noble truth, of course, is dukkha, and dukkha is suffering, unsatisfactoriness, not quite what we want it to be, the way we want it to be. But the first noble truth is that these conditions, these unsatisfactory conditions do arise. Whether they're good or bad, it doesn't really matter, but they always have a beginning, the Buddha said. And that's basically the second noble truth, that dukkha begins. But then the third noble truth is that dukkha has an end. And I've always liked the way that those first three of the Four Noble Truths sort of sit together, because the second two are showing you how the dukkha that he talked about has a beginning, it comes about, and then it comes to an end. And indeed, the Buddha, when asked about this, he really made a very definitive statement about this. He said, with my teachings of Buddhism, he said, I teach nothing more than the beginning of dukkha and the ending of dukkha. So then the fourth noble truth, which is the Eightfold Path, that is all about understanding these first three noble truths. So I wanted to put that out there for you straight away, so that you can see that dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, suffering, is very, very apparent in the world. It's very natural. So it is fairly natural that you are also going to be looking for ways to try, you and me are going to be looking for ways to try and finish with this trouble. So from that point of view, suicidal ideation becomes, like a fairly natural, and I believe is a fairly common thing for most people. Most people don't sort of follow it through too seriously because, they realise that that's not really the right thing to do. But for those of us that start playing around with it and making those thoughts stronger in our mind, this is really where I would like to sort of address this talk too, just to be able to allow for those people just to be able to see very clearly just what it is that we're playing with here. Because one of the best psychological statements that I ever heard in all the work that I've done in this area, or that I heard from a Buddhist psychologist, was the best antidote to suicide is just simply not to do it. Don't do it. And that sounds maybe trite or even a bit simple. But in actual fact, from a Buddhist perspective, it's really a very, very wise thing to say, because you can expect all these thoughts to be there, but the way that the way that the Buddha taught us how to practice is to is to look at what's happening and try to understand these conditions as they arise in our mind, so that we can then find ways to balance them out, to balance the situation in the way that we are living with it. So we use our meditation, and probably one of the most significant things that you can use with this is in the meditation is to develop a deep practice where you can move yourself sort of right into the heart of the present moment, so that you don't get so caught up into the past and the future. Because the Buddha, when he was teaching meditation, was teaching just this very fact, to try and bring our minds right into the present moment, right into the heart of where we are right now. Because this present moment is really the only reality that is there. There's really nothing to be found in terms of reality in the past, and there's nothing to be found in reality in the future. The future is yet to come. And the past, while it conditions maybe the way we think about things in the present, in the future, but essentially it's gone. I like the way that Ajahn Brahm talks about this. He talks about the past conditions as being like corpses that we sort of drape around our neck and carry around with us. And it's kind of not a bad way to see these troublesome things that we worry about from the past. You know, maybe I didn't do that right, or I'm not getting what I want, or I didn't get a fair deal. I've got a rough trot going on. I'm not being treated fairly. All of these sorts of things that cause us to ruminate and give ourselves trouble. They are all there in the past, but they're basically finished. You've got the present moment. The present moment is always fresh and it's always real. And as we deepen our practice and as we move closer towards the present moment, first by just watching the breath going in and the breath going out. And I might just quickly add that the breath going in and the breath going out is really looking to understand the second and the third noble truth that the Buddha talked about. The breath going in is consciousness, or the consciousness of the breath, a condition, it's beginning, the breath coming in, and then the breath going out is the third noble truth. This conditioned consciousness is finishing. So it's beginning and it's ending. So even right there in our breath, we've got the ability to see the second and the third noble truth in action. But of course, as we get deeper, we go deeper and deeper into our mind and deeper into the stillness of our mind, because beyond the breath, we can eventually get to this place of stillness. And indeed, Ajahn Brahm goes even further than that to teach the beauty and the joy of jhanas, being able to sort of drop off your body, drop off the world, let the world totally go, let your body totally go, so that the mind is just there, present, just being conditioned and brought about into your mind, because the mind itself is stillness. It's the consciousness of being still. You're conscious of the stillness. And this stillness itself is a condition, because this stillness is iterating very, very fast. It's moving around. It's going around and around and around very fast. The Buddha said it's moving around countless times in the wink of an eye. Countless times it begins and ends in the wink of an eye. But then you've got this countless times going on here, and I've just explained about the breath beginning and its ending, and we can see that these conditions, they build up and they aggregate. And this is really where the Buddha, I think, made a wonderful talk or a commentary on what he called the khandhas, which is basically the aggregations, the 5 khandhas. So he talked about the 5 khandhas, the first one just being rupa, which is the body and the world. It's everything that's physical, everything that's conditioned into the physical, everything that's been formed into the physical, fused, if you like, fused from the mental states into the physical states. And then the second kanda, the second aggregation is feelings. The third aggregation or khandas is perceptions. And then the second is movement of mind, the way the mind moves. And then the first aggregation is the aggregation of just pure consciousness, stillness. So we can know that this stillness is really, even though it's very, very close to the moment and very, very beneficial to know about, and very beneficial to practice towards, to have our practice heading towards that direction. It's very useful to know about the stillness, because we can use that stillness then as a datum. We can start to see our lives from the point of view of the stillness, rather than being caught up in the movement of our mind that's out beyond the stillness, so that you're kind of lost in the world. When the stillness is there in the way that the Buddha taught, we can have the stillness of mind very present in our minds while we are watching out and watching the world as it moves, the conditions that move past in the stream of consciousness that makes up our mind, or makes up what we see to be our mind. But really, at the very basis, at the very heart of all of this, these conditions is this stillness. But the stillness itself aggregates. So that aggregates into all sorts of conditions. It aggregates and compounds into the conditions that we know about, the feelings. The first four of these khandas are, of course, mental conditions. It's only the fifth one. Just 20% of the khandas are physical. But the first four, 80% basically, are made up of mind states. And that's those mind states that build and aggregate and form the things that we think about, the dreams that we dream about, and all of the movement that ends up sort of moving towards the fusing of all of that into this physical world. And we can see how easily that can just fall away, really. If you just go and do one of Ajahn Brahm's retreats, you'll see how when the mind is focused and unified, when these things start to collapse back inside each other, it's a bit like, you can imagine, a little bit like Veryoska dolls or the babushka dolls in Russia, one inside the other. But the five senses the five physical senses, all with their own consciousness, but they will unify and come back into what we like to call the sixth sense of mind, the mind itself, so that the mind is just standing forth, so that you can see very clearly what this mind is and what the still consciousness of mind is, when there's nothing moving in the mind at all, just the stillness that's iterating countless times in the wink of an eye. So when you start to see things from that way, you see how things start to build up and aggregate. So you can start off with that, the pure consciousness itself, and then look at a breath. And then you might want to look at a day. You know, a day begins perhaps over here. It begins and then it ends. And then a week begins and then it ends. And a year begins and it ends. And then you can go on from there to say, you know, even a life can begin and it ends. But when we're sitting in the stillness of the present moment, we can start to see these things. We can start to intuit what it is that's happening when we're watching these things. We can see that this, first of all, the breath is beginning and ending in the stillness of your mind. The days are beginning and ending. The weeks are beginning and ending in the stillness of your mind. The years are beginning and ending in the stillness of your mind. And then even your life is beginning and ending in the stillness of your mind. I mean, it's not always true that we can sort of see these. Most of us can't really see how we were born, we're not able to see that. Although there are some practitioners around that I'm reminded of Yogananda, who was a man who could remember his birth. And there are a few people that can do that, but for most of us we really can't. But we can intuit it. I mean, we know our parents and mothers have told us that we were born, so we know that there was a birth and that we were born and all about our birth. But then the birth has its beginning and then eventually it comes to an end. And we can intuit that too. We can see, even though we might not sort of fully appreciate what the death is, although in Buddhist terms, we're practicing to really to try and see that very clearly, to try and be aware of what it is that's happening there. But it runs right through even to universes. You can think of a universe as something that begins and ends. In fact, when the Buddha was asked by his monks at one time, he was asked, where does consciousness begin? Where does it all begin? And the Buddha said to them, I've looked back over 24 kalpas. And a kalpa, as you might or might not know, is actually a universal cycle, the length of a universal cycle, a whole universe that has begun and it's ended. And he said he looked back over 24 of those periods of time and places, and he said, no beginning can be seen. So that just really gives us an idea of just the ubiquitous nature of this consciousness, the way that consciousness is there in the world, and sometimes we know about it. I mean, sometimes we're conscious, sometimes we're subconscious, oftentimes we're unconscious. But this consciousness is still there, and we can intuit that, we can know that. We can know that when we start to practice and be in the present moment, to be very still and quiet and relaxed into the present moment. These intuitions are there for us to see and know. So when that starts to happen, then we can start to change our view of the world around a bit, so that we can see that we're watching the world outside moving, but the stillness, the consciousness, the knowing what it is that we know is really right here in the present moment, in the stillness of the present moment. So when you start to see things from that way, you start to get a better idea of when desperate things like suicidal ideation come into your mind, you can start to see that there is a solution to this dukkha in the world. It might, it certainly is not, well, it's not necessarily easy to practice to see this. I know that the practice really takes quite a bit of dedication, and we need to, we need to be quite committed into doing it, because the world is very wily. It very easily pulls us out. We can very easily become enchanted with the world, with consciousness, with the way consciousness moves, the way we perceive it, the way that we feel when those perceptions are there, the way that we feel with the good and the bad feelings. And they always pull us in, and you can see where the Buddha starts to talk about the desire and the aversion that goes to create the world when we hold on to these things, when we hold on to the desire and hold on to the aversion. You can see how the enchantment that's there as we're starting to reach out to grab onto these things. And it's only really when we can allow ourselves to be still, allow ourselves to relax back into the present moment, and to be able to just see what it is that we're grasping onto, and to see that we're grasping onto this duality all of the time, this dual nature of extremes. And I think it is also worth saying that there is this universe I see myself as being absolutely perfect, because the dual nature of things makes certain that it's perfect. Now, even the way that physicists try to calculate and look at what they call the grand unification of everything, all the physical things anyway. The way they see that, they've always got that theory grounded in the idea that the balance of it all is zero, that there is really nothing there. And indeed, this is what the Buddha told us too, that when he looked right down deep into his mind, into the present moment, he came back and told us about the three characteristics of all things. And again, that's just simply dukkha, the first characteristic of all things, that it has this nature of being of dukkha. And just in saying that too, I maybe just need to say that probably the Pali version of the way that's, or the Pali nature of that word is probably something that really needs to be understood in the way that he meant that to be in Pali, because it's very difficult to find an exact translation of just exactly what dukkha means. Dukkha, it certainly can mean suffering and unsatisfactoriness and all of these words, but it's got this specific nature that the Buddha was meaning when he talked about this as in the First Noble Truth, as the First Noble Truth. That this dukkha is really something that it's not something to be desired. He really did teach the ending of it. And if you're coming back to that statement that he made about consciousness, when he was asked about where consciousness, where does it all begin? And he said I looked back over 24 kalpas and no beginnings can be seen. I mean, you can see that in the nature of perhaps even sort of sharing with the Christian tradition. The Christian tradition talk about eternity, everlasting life. And here the Buddha's saying he's looked in his mind and he's looked right back over 24 kalpas and no beginning can be seen. So these two extremes are really quite nice bookends, aren't they? You've got beginningless beginnings, and at the other end, the other side of the coin, you've got eternity or everlasting life. But the Buddha never talked anything about that, did he? Because he said that when we're looking into the present moment, we should look and just notice the stillness that's right in the heart of the present moment. This is in the crossover point from the past to the future. So just looking right there in the heart of the present moment, he said this is where you'll find truth and reality, the beauty and truth of the reality of the present moment that's right there. And this very, very clearly sets up what the Buddha was talking to. It is, in a way, he talked about it as the middle way between extremes. So we're not talking about a nihilistic point of view, or we're not talking about a theistic point of view. We're talking about the middle way between those extremes. And when those extremes become clear and become clear in our meditation, we can start to see just the way that the Buddha was telling us to see the world, to be able to apprehend the right view of the way the world is. And that is that there is this truth, this beauty right in the heart of the present moment, and that being caught in the world is not a desirable thing to try and practice. But we need to understand that for ourselves, of course, and really this is the purpose of this talk today, because I wanted to just be able to share with you just the way that we can get caught into these very, very negative states sometimes when we're trying to make everything perfect in the world. And the world's not a place where we can have just perfection. The world's a place where everything lives. All of the extremes, they all live in the world, and they're all going to present themselves to us in one way or another at various times, whether it's this life or whether it's the next life or whether it's been in past lives. But this way of seeing things also gives you a very clear view of the way past lives work, because you can see that the stream of consciousness that's passing by us in the present moment is really a measure of the nature of our karma, the karma that's being that we've all made and generated, and the karma that's moving through the present moment and will indeed play itself out in the future unless we balance ourselves with the stillness and the wisdom that we can find in the present moment. So, with those few words, I think I'll just leave the conversation today. But again, just to remind you that if you would like to ring the Buddhist Society, if you look at our website, you're on the BSWA website, bswa.org, you will find there a cascade that indicates the care group. And if you click on that cascade, it'll drop down to a menu, and you'll see there a few little words about what the care group is set up to do. You'll also find the times that we're open, and we're trying to make that more and more as the time goes on, the times that we're open, but also the telephone number that you can call. And you're welcome to call at any time to talk about anything at all that you'd like, any troubles or anything that you'd like to share or discuss about your life and the way things are for you. But again, just a gentle reminder that probably if there is a crisis going on for you, it would be best to call your crisis line, because the BSWA care group is not really set up to be able to handle situations like that. So, with those few words, I'll bid you farewell and again just issue an invitation to call the BSWA Care Listening Line any time that you would like to do so. Good afternoon.